Marcus Rashford made a big impact in this whole debate back in 2020 and before that. He's had a lasting legacy that's been credited quite rightly across the United Kingdom. The SNP at that point were victims of their own spin and approach to politics. They are now as a result of that. Because at the time, John Swinney sought to exploit that campaign and draw a difference between the Conservative government in Westminster and the Scottish government. He said, "Hunger doesn't take a holiday. Every child, every minute, every school day is incredibly important for learning." And he committed the SNP to delivering this promise. By August 2022, 2 years ago, they promised to deliver that. But they clearly didn't have a costed plan, because it was evident from almost the point that they agreed and they put it in the manifesto, they were retreating from that commitment. They blamed initially local authorities for being unable to deliver it in 2022. Then they blamed the Westminster government. Now they're blaming the Labour government, even though they've only been in power for a few weeks as opposed to the 17 years of the SNP government. So they hunted around almost from the very beginning for an explanation, an excuse for why they failed to deliver that solemn promise that they put in the manifesto in 2021. And it was clear at that point, because we heard from the Finance Committee, we heard from the Scottish Fiscal Commission, we've been hearing from them for years about the looming financial crisis at the heart of the Scottish Government. And they refused to accept that, and they made endless promises, jumping on headlines that have been created by Marcus Rashford, quite rightly, but jumping on them without a costed plan. I have no problem with meeting the needs and the desires of the electorate, but the government have to be honest and straightforward from the very beginning, rather than using them as election gimmicks. And we have been challenged today by the Education Secretary where to find the money. Now, if she had been at the Education Committee last week, she would know the answer, because Graham Day knows exactly where all the money is, because apparently he's worked all of this out. He made an agreement with the college unions right across the country, and he told us he didn't have a clue where the finance was going to come from. I suspect he knows everything about the finances of the Scottish Government, and he has the money tucked up his sleeve. So all she needs to do is to reach over to Graham Day, and he will have the answer to everything. So we'll take no lectures. We'll take no lectures from the SNP about where to find the money, because they play that trick against the opposition every single time. But they know the finances back to front. And if they didn't, why did they make this promise in 2021? Surely they would have had a costed plan working out through all the years. Surely they would have known the Conservatives were going to have austerity for years and the successive Labour government was going to be dreadful. Surely they had worked all of that out before they made this promise. But we know that they didn't, because they've been fast and loose with the public finances in Scotland, making endless promises that they just simply cannot keep. So today, the Education Secretary has a challenge, because it's quite clear from a colleague, Ross Greer, and from the Conservatives and Labour and ourselves, we'll all be voting against the Government's amendment today. So she will lose. So she has to decide how she's going to respond to the will of Parliament, because the will of Parliament is incredibly important, as we've heard from our bosses, our previous First Ministers, over many, many years. So we would expect a statement today from the Government as to how they're going to meet this promise, which is not only our promise, but it's the Government's promise for them to deliver. So we deserve an answer from the Government today.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I should start by thanking the Conservatives, not just for using some of their time this afternoon to debate free school meals, but because both of their debates this afternoon, both topics, are a defence of green policies from the Butte House Agreement era. I am delighted that our Conservative colleagues, having spent so long trying to bring down the Butte House Agreement, are now the first to defend the legacy of having Greens in government. And I will try to be collegiate, Presiding Officer, but I do need to start off by making the point that there's more than a whiff of hypocrisy here to have the Conservatives talking about ways that we can tackle child poverty. the single biggest driver of child poverty in modern British history is the Conservative Party. It's the decisions the Conservative Party have made, whether it's introducing the two-child cap, slashing universal credit, decimating public services. This is the choice. You can't pick and choose when you want to lift children out of poverty and when you want to push more children into it without accusations of hypocrisy being flung at you. But on to that point of collegiality and consensus, I actually want to talk first about a visit that Oliver Mundell and I and some other colleagues took last session to a school in Finland, or to multiple schools in Finland, which has had free school meals, universal free school meals, for some time. That was an experience that we all, I think, gained a great deal from, because in that school we saw every pupil, almost every pupil, sitting together, staying in school at lunchtime for a healthy, warm, free meal. And that did a whole range of things. It tackled inequality. It helped those families who needed it, who would have struggled with paying for school meals. It improved attainment, obviously. Hungry children struggle to learn, they struggle to behave. It eliminated stigma, because we know even with the best will in the world, even with the most subtle systems of means testing and entitlement, children can find out who is and is not entitled to a free school meal. And even if they don't, those children who would be entitled, who are entitled under our current system, are worried even about members of staff knowing that their family situation means that they're entitled. So no one misses out under a universal system. And it increases social cohesion, because all children were eating together, yes, including the children of families who could afford to pay for meals, but who otherwise would have probably gone out of school at lunchtime. It's a very different culture that is created as a result of that universal provision. Finland is the gold standard. It's all the proof, all the evidence we need that universal provision works. And it's outrageous that here in Scotland and across the UK, we have children sitting in school hungry in one of the richest countries in the history of the planet. I'm proud that the Scottish Greens, through the last budget agreement last session, just a few weeks before the pandemic brought a lot to a halt, managed to secure the government's agreement to immediately expand free school meals universally to primary 4 and 5, and then move on to primary 6 and 7. That was part of a wider package that we worked on together with colleagues in the SNP, for example, to cancel school meal debt. The Scottish Greens were the first to uncover the scale of school meal debt in Scotland. We did the research, we campaigned, and then with the support of the Cabinet Secretary and the then First Minister Hamza Yousaf, we secured the funding to cancel that debt. This afternoon's debate is a bit odd, because we're debating something that we all agree on. The real question is about money, where I agree with Liam Kerr. It is a question of priorities. His priorities and mine are very different. I do believe that the Greens have proposals for making this financially affordable. For a start, there are ways you can minimise costs around shared catering facilities and timetabling. But the problem I have with the government agreement is that it presents, quite rightly, the scale of austerity delivered by the Conservative Party, not reversed by the Labour Party, as a challenge, absolutely. But it then makes out that this challenge makes it inevitable. It's not inevitable. There are a range of ways that the Scottish Government can save money in year this year. On the capital side, we would freeze spending on trunk roads and motorways expansion. On the revenue side, we would scale back on tax breaks for shooting estates, for example. This is a question of political choice, Presiding Officer. I want to hear more about the choices that all colleagues would make this afternoon if we do genuinely have a consensus around the priority of delivering this policy.